as an originalist, do you believe that the Obergefell versus Hodges decision affirming constitutional right to same-sex marriage, was that wrongly decided?
Senator, Obergefell versus Hodges is binding precedent of the Supreme Court.
I'm aware of that. Do you believe it was wrongly decided?
Senator, as a circuit judge, I would be bound to follow
I understand that, but that's not responsive to my question. Had you been on the Court of Appeals prior to that decision, would you have decided the case that way?
Senator, prior to Obergefell versus Hodges, there was a prior Supreme Court case addressing the issue, and I would have followed that case.
Well, would you have reached the same conclusion as the Supreme Court in Obergefell?
Senator, I would have followed binding precedent.
You're not answering my question. Would you have reached the same conclusion?
Senator, the conclusions that the two precedents reached were potentially in conflict, and I would have to follow the precedent that...
So you can't tell us at this point whether you would have reached the same conclusion as the Supreme Court in Obergefell. So let me ask you about the Supreme Court's decision in Lawrence.
Hey, patriots. Before we dive into today's explosive breakdown, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. The fight for truth doesn't rest, and neither do we here at Right View Nation. Let's make sure the truth gets louder than the lies coming from the radical left. Folks, what we just witnessed is a prime-time example of how the radical left, led by none other than Adam Schiff, is on a relentless mission to intimidate, harass, and politically assassinate any judicial nominee who dares to believe in the Constitution as it was written. That's right, Adam Schiff, the man who peddled the Russia hoax for years, the same guy who lied to the American people with a straight face, now wants to lecture us about integrity and precedent? Please.
Mr. Tung, you just said that you're an originalist and a textualist. So let me ask you, the Emoluments Clause provides that no person holding public office shall accept any present of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state. Do you believe the language in the Emoluments Clause that says any present of any kind, whatever, means any present of any kind, whatever?
Senator, you are quoting the text of the Emoluments Clause, and I cannot dispute with the text of the Emoluments Clause.
So it would apply to any present, including an airplane?
It would apply to the president, I believe, your Senator.
And I take it as an originalist, you would accept that the founders would have never subscribed to the idea that a president in their time could have accepted a multi-$100 million gift from a foreign state?
Senator, the premise of your question implicates live issues in the public and pursuant to the canons of judicial ethics.
Well, let me just ask you, would the founders have believed that if a president received 100 camels from a foreign state, that was an emolument?
Senator, it's difficult to answer that question in the
Is it, though, as an originalist? Isn't it pretty simple? You've got the clear language of the Constitution.
Senator, one has to look at the language, but also the history surrounding the Emoluments Clause in order to discern.
I am looking at the history. Let me move on to another question. As an originalist, do you believe that the Obergefell versus Hodges decision affirming constitutional right to same-sex marriage, was that wrongly decided?
Senator, Obergefell versus Hodges is binding precedent of the Supreme Court.
I'm aware of that. Do you believe it was wrongly decided?
Senator, as a circuit judge, I would be bound to follow
I understand that, but that's not responsive to my question. Had you been on the Court of Appeals prior to that decision, would you have decided the case that way?
Senator, prior to Obergefell versus Hodges, there was a prior Supreme Court case addressing the issue, and I would have followed that case.
Well, would you have reached the same conclusion as the Supreme Court in Obergefell?
Senator, I would have followed binding precedent.
You're not answering my question. Would you have reached the same conclusion?
Senator, the conclusions that the two precedents reached were potentially in conflict, and I would have to follow the precedent that...
So you can't tell us at this point whether you would have reached the same conclusion as the Supreme Court in Obergefell. So let me ask you about the Supreme Court's decision in Lawrence affirming a constitutional right to be intimate among same-sex couples. Do you believe that was wrongly decided?
Senator, Lawrence versus Texas is a binding precedent of the Supreme
Again, I'm
Court.
aware
and
of
I would
that,
be
but I'm
bound by
asking
that
you whether
precedent.
you believe that was rightly decided or wrongly decided.
Senator, you're asking about my personal views.
No, I'm
and as a
asking you about your
nominee-
legal views. I'm asking about your legal views. Let me ask you about another case. Do you believe that Loving versus Virginia, which affirmed an interracial couple's right to marry, was that wrongly decided?
Senator, my wife and I are an interracial couple, and so if that case were wrongly decided, I would be in big trouble.
Okay, so you do agree with the reasoning of that case, and you're willing to say that. I appreciate that. But you're unwilling to say that you agree that Obergefell and Lawrence were correctly decided. Why is that?
Senator, again, those decisions are binding precedent of the Supreme Court, and I would be
No,
bound
I'm
to
aware of
follow.
that. So is Loving. And you're willing to tell us that you believe Loving was correctly decided, but you're not willing to say the other decisions were correctly decided. That seems less originalist and more situational. Let me ask you this about your role in the brief in Moore versus Harper. This was a case involving the discredited independent state legislature theory, which would allow a state legislature, even in the absence of a governor's signature, to effectively overturn an election. Do you believe that the Supreme Court wrongly decided Moore v. Harper when it rejected your view?
Senator, again, Moore v. Harper is binding precedent of the Supreme Court. and
Yeah, no,
although-
I get that, but you're still not answering my question. So let me ask you a different way. If a state legislature decided after an election to pass a bill, even in the absence of a governor signing it, to throw out absentee ballots that were mailed prior to the election but arrived after the election, would it be your view that a state Supreme Court or federal court would have to allow the legislature to overturn the election, would be powerless to correct that effort to overturn a free and fair election?
Senator, Moore versus Harper states that state courts can review what the state legislatures have passed as a matter of the
No,
Constitution.
I'm aware of that. And my concern, though, is that your unwillingness to embrace the reasoning of these decisions means that where there is room, and there is room in all of these decisions, and most particularly Moore v. Harper, for you as a court of appeals judge to narrow these decisions, it sounds like you'll take that opportunity to narrow those rights. And in the case of Moore, which I agree with Judge Luddick, the most important case to our democracy in a century, narrowing that decision means empowering state legislatures to overturn election results, and I cannot imagine a more dangerous idea on the bench. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Now let's break this farce down. Adam Schiff took the floor and went on a rampage against a nominee who openly stated that he's an originalist and a textualist, someone who believes the Constitution means what it says. Imagine that. A judge who reads the law as it's written, not how the woke mob feels it should be interpreted in 2025. That terrifies the left because they can't manipulate that. Schiff jumps right into the emoluments clause, asking absurd hypotheticals about camels and airplanes as if that somehow makes a constitutional argument. This isn't a comedy skit, folks. It's a Senate hearing. But Schiff is more concerned with scoring media brownie points than understanding constitutional law. Then he pivots, predictably, to same-sex marriage, intimacy rights, and interracial marriage, desperately trying to corner this nominee into giving a soundbite he can use to claim bigotry. The nominee stood firm. Respectfully, he refused to give personal opinions on cases like Obergefell and Lawrence versus Texas, not because he's evasive, but because that's what ethical judges do. They don't prejudge future cases. They don't play politics. They follow the law. But Schiff doesn't care about judicial ethics. He only cares about ideological conformity. If you don't parrot the left's views word for word, you're labeled a threat to democracy. It's sick. Then Schiff hits Moore versus Harper, a case about whether state legislatures have authority over elections without interference from unelected courts. Schiff calls it the most important case in a century. You know why? Because it threatens the left's grip on judicial activism. If states reclaim their constitutional role in elections, the DC elites lose their chokehold on how America votes. And here's the most disgusting part. Schiff basically accuses the nominee of being a threat to democracy for not parroting left-wing legal doctrine. Think about that. A man who respects the Constitution is now a dangerous idea on the bench? That's rich coming from a guy who spent 4 years trying to overturn an election result he didn't like. Adam Schiff doesn't want judges. He wants puppets. He doesn't want constitutional interpretation. He wants ideological enforcement. He doesn't want justice. He wants control. Let me be clear, patriots. This is not about one nominee. This is about the left's war on constitutional governance. They don't want checks and balances. They want unchecked power. And they're willing to smear, distort, and destroy anyone who stands in their way. And I'll say this. We need more judges like this nominee. Judges who don't play partisan games. Judges who apply the law, not their emotions. Judges who understand that the Constitution is not a living document to be twisted for political gain, but a blueprint for liberty. If you're sick and tired of seeing people like Adam Schiff weaponize their office to bully constitutionalists, then do your part. Like this video. Comment below. Let us know what you think of Schiff's twisted circus. Share this with every proud American who believes in the rule of law. And don't forget to subscribe to Right View Nation for more unapologetic, unfiltered, and patriotic truth-telling. We're not backing down. We're just getting started. This is Right View Nation, and we'll never stop fighting for America. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.